You know the picture. A man with long hair and impossible muscles, tearing a lion apart with his bare hands, then bringing down the pillars of a temple while a crowd screams beneath him. Samson, the strong man, the one whose power lived in his hair, until a woman named Delilah cut it off and took everything away. That's the version in the picture books. The hero whose secret was his hair, undone by one bad night and one pair of scissors. There is just one problem with it. The Bible never once says the strength was in his hair. Read the actual story slowly, from the announcement of his birth to his last breath in the rubble, and the hair turns out to be almost a decoy. The strength came from somewhere else entirely. The haircut wasn't the cause of his fall. It was the final step of a collapse that had started years earlier, over things almost nobody notices in the story. And the man himself is nothing like the Sunday school hero. He's reckless, thin-skinned, ruled by his appetites, chasing the wrong women and burning down half a countryside when he doesn't get his way. By almost any measure, he's a walking disaster. So how did the strongest man who ever lived end up blind, shackled, and grinding grain like an animal for the very people he was born to defeat? And how did that same broken man end up listed centuries later in the Bible's own hall of heroes, right beside Abraham and Moses? To answer that, we have to go back to a childless woman, a stranger with a face like fire, and a promise made before he was even born. Let's get into it. Before there was a strong man, there was a beaten down people. And that's where you have to start, because Samson doesn't arrive into a peaceful world. He arrives into an occupation. For 40 years, the text says, the Philistines had ruled over Israel. The Philistines were a sea people, settled along the coast in 5 fortified cities with iron weapons, trained armies, and a grip on the whole region. And you have to understand who these Philistines actually were, because it makes Israel's situation even more hopeless. The Philistines weren't local, they were newcomers, a sea people who had crossed the Mediterranean from the direction of the Aegean, from the world of the early Greeks, and crashed onto the coast of Canaan a couple of generations before Samson. They came with better ships, better armor, and one thing that mattered more than all of it: iron. The Philistines had mastered ironworking, and they guarded that knowledge like a state secret. There's a line later in the Bible that says, there was not a single blacksmith to be found anywhere in Israel because the Philistines had made sure of it, so that the Hebrews could not forge their own swords or spears. Picture that, an entire nation kept deliberately unarmed, forced to go down to their occupiers just to sharpen a farming blade. That is the world Samson is born into. A people with no weapons, no army, and no way out. And God's answer to all of it will not be an army. It's going to be one man. Israel, by contrast, was a loose scatter of tribes with no king, no standing army, and no answer to the war machine sitting on their doorstep. This is the book of Judges, and it is the darkest, most chaotic stretch in the whole Hebrew Bible. Over and over, the people drift away from God, fall under some oppressor, cry out and get rescued by a flawed hero called a judge. Samson is the last of them, and he is easily the strangest. Now zoom all the way down from the armies to a single household. A man named Manoah from the tribe of Dan, living in a town called Zorah. And his wife, whose name the story never even gives us. What it gives us instead is one heavy word. She was barren, she had no children, and in that world, for a woman, that was a private grief that never quite healed. And then a stranger shows up in a field. The text calls him the angel of the Lord. He appears to the woman, alone, and tells her the thing she had stopped hoping to hear. You are going to have a son. But this is where it stops being an ordinary birth announcement, because the messenger attaches conditions to this child that mark him out as something rare from the very first breath. He tells her the boy is to be a Nazirite, set apart, dedicated to God, and a Nazirite lived under 3 specific vows laid out elsewhere in the law, so keep these 3 in mind, because this entire story turns on them. 1. No wine, no strong drink, nothing at all from the grapevine. 2. No razor was ever to touch his head. His hair would grow uncut his whole life, a visible flag that said, "This man belongs to God." And 3. He was never to go near a dead body, not even to touch a corpse, because contact with death made a person unclean. Wine, hair, and death. 3 lines he was never meant to cross. And I want you to notice something most retellings skip right over. When people talk about Samson, they only ever remember one of these vows, the hair. But the angel gives all 3. And by the end of this video, you'll see that Samson breaks every single one of them, one after another, and the hair, the famous one, is the very last to go. That's the thread. Hold on to it, because the order he breaks these 3 vows in is the whole tragedy of his life, and the first one falls a lot sooner than you would ever guess. Long before Delilah, before he's even married. Manoah, the husband, wants to meet this messenger for himself. So he prays, and the stranger comes back, and Manoah asks him a very human question. "What is your name?" And the answer he gets is one of the eeriest lines in the passage. The messenger says, "Why do you ask my name, seeing it is wonderful?" In the Hebrew, that word for wonderful is the kind of word reserved for things beyond human understanding. This was no ordinary traveler. Manoah prepares an offering on a rock, and as the flame goes up, the messenger steps into the fire and rises with it, disappearing into the flame in front of them. Manoah and his wife fall on their faces. Manoah panics. "We have seen God," he says. "We are going to die." And his wife, the calmer of the two, points out the obvious. If God wanted to kill us, he would not have just accepted our offering and promised us a son. So, yeah, not a normal Tuesday in Zorah. And here's a pattern worth noticing, because the Bible only pulls it out for a handful of people. A barren woman, a miraculous announcement, a child promised by God before he's even conceived and set apart from the womb for a purpose. If that setup sounds familiar, it should, because it's the same shape that surrounds Isaac and Samuel and centuries later, John the Baptist, and in its own way, Jesus himself. When Scripture wants to signal that a life is going to bend the whole course of history, it reaches for this exact template, a closed womb opened by God for a reason. So the text is quietly filing Samson away with the specially sent ones, the rare few whose arrival gets announced from heaven, which makes what he goes on to do with that calling all the more staggering. "And the child is born, and they name him Shimshon." In English, Samson. Now sit with that name for a second, because it hides a small clue that the whole story is going to pay off in the cruelest way. Most scholars connect Shimshon to the Hebrew word Shemesh, which means sun. His name means something close to little sun, or sunny, or man of the sun, and it fits his home turf perfectly, because just down the road sat a town called Beth Shemesh, House of the Sun, in a valley his people knew well. The boy named for the sun, a child of light, born to a people sitting in the dark under an empire. Remember that? Because of all the ways this story could end, it ends with the man of the sun having his eyes put out, finishing his life in total darkness. The name is a setup. The Hebrew planted it there from the beginning. And then comes the line that tells you where this is all headed. The angel had said something specific about what this child was for. He would begin, the text says, to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. Begin, not finish. And that one small word is a quiet warning the story never lets you forget. Samson is not going to solve the Philistine problem. He's going to crack it open, start it, and leave it unfinished for someone else generations later to complete. He's a first strike, not a final victory. A deliverer with an expiration date built into his job description. The boy grows up, and the story gives us one more detail before the action starts. The detail that is the actual key to everything. It says, the Spirit of the Lord began to stir him, began to move in him. This invisible thing, the Spirit of God, starts pressing on this young man, and it is that presence, not his muscles and not his hair, that is about to do the impossible. So here's what we have. A nation in chains. A childless woman handed a miracle. a boy dedicated to God under 3 unbreakable vows, named for the sun, and filled with a spirit that isn't his own. Every piece is in place for a legend. The trouble is, this particular hero is about to take all of it, this gift, this calling, this spirit, and aim it straight at the first pretty face he sees in the wrong town. And that's where the story stops being a miracle and starts being a tragedy. Because the first word out of grown-up Samson's mouth, the very first thing this chosen deliverer says, is not a prayer and not a battle cry. It's 4 words about a woman he just laid eyes on in enemy territory. Get her for me. Samson goes down to Timnah, a Philistine town, and he sees a woman there. That's it. That's the whole reason. He goes home and tells his parents, "I saw a Philistine woman in Timnah. Now get her for me as a wife." His mother and father are horrified. "Is there really no woman among your own people," they ask, "that you have to go take a wife from these uncircumcised Philistines? These are the enemy. This is the empire crushing your nation, and you want to marry into it." But Samson doesn't care. "She's right in my eyes," he says. "Get her." And here the story does something fascinating. It tells you quietly, in a little aside to the reader, that this whole disaster was somehow part of a bigger plan. It says his parents didn't know that this was from the Lord, who was looking for an occasion to move against the Philistines. So even Samson's worst impulses, his appetite, his stubbornness, his terrible taste in women are being woven into something. That does not make his choices good. It makes them dangerous in a way even he doesn't understand. So they head down to Timnah, and on the way, walking through the vineyards, it happens. A young lion comes roaring out at Samson. And here is the phrase you have to watch for, because it is the real engine of this entire story, and it's about to repeat again and again. The text says, "The Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him." In Hebrew, that verb is tsalach. It means to rush, to break through, to surge with force. The Spirit of the Lord surged onto Samson, and with nothing in his hands, no weapon at all, he tears the lion apart as easily as a man might rip apart a young goat. Read that again, because everyone misremembers this. It does not say his hair rushed upon him. It does not say his muscles surged. It says the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him. That is the source. Every impossible feat Samson performs in this entire story is credited by the text itself to the Spirit of God coming over him, not to his hair. Circle that. It matters more than anything else in the video. And Samson tells no one about the lion, not his parents. He just keeps walking, marries the woman, and life goes on. But then, sometime later, he travels back down the same road to collect his bride, and he steps off the path to look at the carcass of that lion. And what he finds inside it changes the shape of the whole story. A swarm of bees has made a hive inside the dead lion, and there is honey. And here's what Samson does. He reaches his bare hands into the carcass of a dead animal, scoops out the honey, and eats it as he walks. He even carries some back to his mother and father and gives it to them without telling them where it came from. Now stop. Go back to the 3 vows. Vow number 3. A Nazirite must never touch a dead body, ever. And here is Samson, the man set apart to God, digging his hands into a rotting carcass for a snack. This is the first vow to fall, and notice what does not happen. Lightning doesn't strike, his strength doesn't vanish, nothing visible changes at all. He breaks a sacred vow, and the story just keeps moving. Keep that in your mind, because it is the clue that unlocks the ending. His power was never a machine that switched off the second he broke a rule. Something more personal was going on. At the wedding, Samson throws a feast, and the Hebrew word used for it, mishteh, literally means a drinking feast. It's built from the word for drink. For a wedding like this, among these young men, wine flowed, which means vow number 1, no wine, nothing from the vine, is almost certainly going down right here too at his own party. That's 2 of the 3 vows, gone, before the famous haircut is even a distant thought. And Samson's strength stays exactly where it is. 30 Philistine men are seated with him as companions, and to liven things up, Samson does what Samson loves. He plays a game. He offers them a riddle. "Solve it within the 7 days of the feast," he says, "and I'll give each of you a fine linen garment and a change of clothes. Fail, and you owe me 30 of each." They agree, and here's the riddle. Out of the eater came something to eat, and out of the strong came something sweet. It's a good riddle because it's impossible. The answer is the lion and the honey, the strong beast and the sweetness inside it. And Samson is the only living person who knows that story. Nobody at that table can solve it. And that's exactly the problem, because these are not men who lose gracefully. For 3 days, they're stumped. By the 4th, they're panicking, because they can't afford to lose, and they can't stand to be beaten by this outsider. So they go to Samson's new wife, and they threaten her. "Coax the answer out of your husband," they say, "or we will burn you and your father's house down." That's not a metaphor. Fire. This is the part where things stopped being a game. So she does what a terrified person does. She turns on Samson. She cries on him for the rest of the feast. "You don't really love me. You won't even tell me the answer to your riddle." Day after day, until on the 7th day, worn down, he finally tells her. And she immediately tells them. So just before sunset on the final day, the 30 men stroll up to Samson with the answer, and they say it as a taunt in the form of their own little riddle back at him. What is sweeter than honey, and what is stronger than a lion? Samson knows instantly what happened, and his response is one of the sharpest, angriest lines in the book. "If you had not plowed with my heifer," he says, "you would never have solved my riddle," meaning, you got to my wife. You used her against me. He is furious, and here is where the fun and games end and the body count begins. Because the Spirit of the Lord rushes on him again, Salach, that same surge, and Samson walks down to another Philistine city, Ashkelon, and kills 30 men there. He strips them of their clothing and carries it back to pay off his debt to the 30 at the feast. He settles a riddle with a massacre, and then, still burning with anger, he leaves his wife behind entirely and storms back home to his father's house. And that decision, walking out on his wife in a rage, is the small hinge that swings the whole story toward catastrophe. Because while Samson is gone, sulking at home, her father assumes the marriage is over. So he gives Samson's wife to another man, to the very best man from the wedding, one of those 30 companions. And when Samson finally cools down and comes back for her, with a young goat as a gift ready to make up, he finds the door shut and another man in his place. He has no idea yet what that closed door is about to cost. Everyone in this story is making small, human, selfish choices. A frightened wife, an angry husband, a practical father-in-law, and every one of those choices is stacking quietly into a fire that is about to consume an entire region, literally. Because Samson's answer to a broken marriage is not grief. It's arson on a scale the Philistines will never forget. When Samson finds out his wife has been given to another man, he says something chilling in its calm. This time he says, "I am blameless when I harm the Philistines." In his mind, they started it. Now he has permission. And what he does next is so bizarre and so cinematic that it has survived 3,000 years of retellings. He catches 300 foxes. 300. However long that took. Picture the patience and the rage it takes to trap 300 wild animals. He ties them together, tail to tail in pairs, fastens a torch between each pair, lights the torches, and releases them into the standing grain of the Philistines. The terrified animals bolt in every direction, dragging fire through the fields. The wheat burns, the stacked, already harvested grain burns, the vineyards burn, the olive groves burn. In one night, Samson torches the food supply, the wine supply, and the oil supply of an entire Philistine region. It is economic devastation, delivered by wildlife. It's insane, and it's brilliant, and it is exactly the kind of thing this man does. And the Philistines want to know who did this, and why. When they hear the story that the Timnite gave Samson's wife to another man, they don't go after Samson, they go after her. They take the woman and her father and they burn them to death, the exact fate she betrayed Samson to avoid. She sold him out to escape the fire, and the fire took her anyway. That's not a lesson the story spells out. It just lets it sit there, horrible and quiet. And Samson's reaction to their cruelty is more cruelty. "If this is how you act," he tells them, "I swear I won't stop until I've had my revenge." And he attacks them, the text says, hip and thigh, a great slaughter, then goes and hides in a cave in the rock of Etam. The cycle is spinning faster now, blood for blood, fire for fire, and it's dragging in more and more people with every turn, because now the Philistines bring an army, and they march up, not into their own land, but into Judah, into Israelite territory, looking for Samson. And this is one of the saddest, most telling moments in the whole story. The men of Judah, Samson's own people, are terrified. They don't rally to their strong man. They don't see a deliverer. They send 3,000 of their own men, not to fight the Philistines, but to arrest Samson and hand him over. "Don't you know the Philistines rule over us?" they shout down to him. "What have you done to us?" Think about that. God sent this man to rescue them, and they're so broken, so used to being slaves, that they'd rather turn in their own rescuer than risk their master's anger. Samson agrees to be tied up on one condition, that they won't kill him themselves. They bind him with 2 brand new ropes and lead him down to the Philistines, who come out roaring in triumph to collect their prize. And you already know what word is coming. The Spirit of the Lord rushes upon him. Tsalak. Again. The new ropes on his arms become like burnt flax, like charred thread, and they simply fall off. And Samson reaches down and grabs the first thing near his hand, the fresh jawbone of a donkey, and with that, a single bone from a dead animal, he kills 1,000 men, 1,000, with a jawbone. And when it's over, Samson stands in the carnage and does what Samson always does. He makes up a rhyme about it. With the jawbone of a donkey, he says, "Heaps upon heaps, with the jawbone of a donkey I have struck down 1,000 men." He names the place Ramath Lehi, which means the hill of the jawbone. Even his war has wordplay in it. And then, in the middle of this superhuman display, comes a strangely fragile human moment. Samson is thirsty, desperately thirsty, to the point of collapse. And for the first time in the whole story, he actually talks to God. He cries out, "You gave your servant this great victory," he says, "and now am I going to die of thirst and fall into the hands of these Philistines?" And God answers him. Water opens up from the ground, Samson drinks, his strength returns, and he names the spring En-Hakkore, the spring of the one who called out. Now, watch what the text does right here, because it's easy to miss. Right after that, almost in passing, it drops a single sentence that tells you this went on for a very long time. Samson judged Israel, it says, in the days of the Philistines 20 years. 20 years. This wasn't a wild weekend. For 2 decades, this reckless, brilliant, violent man was the closest thing Israel had to a leader and a shield. Whatever else he was, he stood between his people and the empire for 20 years. And there's a small mystery tucked inside that one sentence. 20 years, and the Bible tells us almost nothing about them. No battles are named, no speeches, no campaigns. We get the lion, the riddle, the foxes, the jawbone, and then this quiet line, judged Israel 20 years, and the story simply moves on. So what was he doing all that time? The most likely answer is that Samson was never really a general. He was a one-man deterrent. He never raised an army, never united the tribes, never took a Philistine city and held it. He was a lone wolf, a walking threat who kept the Philistines nervous and off balance for 20 years simply by being alive, which fits the word spoken over him from the very start. He was sent to begin the deliverance, not to complete it, a holding action, a man buying time for a rescue that someone else, generations later, would have to finish. That unfinished quality is the ache running underneath his whole story, and the text wants you to feel it. And somewhere in there is one more feat that shows you just how far his strength could go. Samson goes down to Gaza, deep in Philistine territory, and spends the night with a prostitute there. And the men of Gaza hear he's inside the city, so they lock the city gates and lie in wait to kill him at dawn. But at midnight, Samson gets up, walks to the city gate, takes hold of the two doors, the posts, the bar, the entire gate assembly, and tears the whole thing out of the ground. Then he hoists it onto his shoulders and carries it away, up to the top of a hill facing distant Hebron, and just leaves it there, a city's iron-barred gate, ripped out and carried off up a mountain like a man taking out the trash. So let's stop and answer the question this whole video is built on. Where does this strength actually come from? Because by now the answer is sitting right there in front of us, repeated at every single feat. The lion, the 30 at Ashkelon, the ropes and the jawbone. Every time the text says the same thing. The Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him. Not once, not a single time in the entire story does the Bible say his power came from his hair. The hair was never the source. The hair was a sign. Here's the way to understand it. The uncut hair was the last visible piece of Samson's vow, the outward flag that said this man still belongs to God. He had already trashed the other two vows, the dead lion, the drinking feast, and kept his strength because the strength was never mechanical. It flowed from his relationship with God, marked by that vow. The hair wasn't a battery, it was a wedding ring. And you can betray everything a wedding ring stands for, long before you ever take it off. That's the secret Samson never quite understood. And it's the secret that's about to destroy him, in the valley of Sorek, at the hands of a woman named Delilah. Before we walk into that valley, one quick thing. Now, if you're the kind of person who would rather know what the text actually says than repeat the version from the picture books, subscribe. That's the whole point of this channel. Every week I take one story people are sure they already understand, and we go back to the original words to find what's really there. It genuinely helps these deeper readings reach people who've only ever heard the flattened version. All right, now back to the valley. Because everything you've just seen, the lion, the jawbone, the gates of Gaza, all of that raw, God-given power is about to be undone. Not by a stronger man, not by an army, by a woman, a soft voice, and a question asked over and over until Samson finally answers it. Her name was Delilah, and she lived in the valley of Sorek. And notice what the text does and does not tell you about her. It never says Samson loved wisely. It never even says she was a Philistine, though she likely was. What it says plainly is that Samson loved her. This is the only woman in the entire story the text says he actually loved, which is exactly what makes what happens next so brutal. Because the Philistine rulers come to Delilah with an offer, and here you get a detail that tells you precisely how badly they wanted this man gone. The lords of the Philistines, the text says, 5 of them, one for each of their great cities, each come to her and each promise the same staggering sum, 1,100 pieces of silver, a piece. Coax the secret of his strength out of him, they tell her, so we can overpower him and tie him down. Do the math on that. 5 rulers, 1,100 pieces of silver each. This is a fortune large enough to make betrayal look like a career move. And it's worth stopping on that silver because the number isn't random, 1,100 pieces from each of 5 rulers. To feel the scale of it, elsewhere in this same period of the Bible, a man hires a full-time household priest to live with him and serve his family for 10 pieces of silver a year. 10. Delilah is being offered more than 100 years of a working wage, and then 5 times over, once from each city. This is generational wealth. Enough to never think about money again for the rest of her life. That is how badly 5 city-states want this one man gone, and that is the weight sitting behind every soft word she's about to speak. She isn't just flirting with him, she's working the highest-paying job of her life. And here's the psychological knife in the whole scene. Samson is not being fooled. That's exactly what makes it a tragedy instead of a con. A con works on someone who never sees it coming. Samson sees it coming, again and again, watches the trap spring shut, and walks back into the room anyway. He is not outsmarted, he is worn down. There's a difference between those two things, And that difference is the saddest part of the man. So Delilah goes to work, and she isn't even subtle about it. She just asks him, "Tell me," she says, "where does your great strength come from? And how could a person tie you up and subdue you?" She asks the man to hand her the blueprint for his own capture, to his face. And this is the part that should stop you cold. Samson knows exactly what she's doing. He has to, because instead of leaving, he plays with her. He gives her a lie. "Tie me up with 7 fresh bowstrings, ones that have never been dried," he tells her, "and I'll be as weak as any other man." So she gets the bowstrings. And here's the chilling part. The text says the Philistines were hiding in the room waiting. She ties him up while he sleeps, then shouts, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson!" And he snaps the bowstrings like a thread touched by fire and stands up. The trap springs, and it catches nothing. Now think about what Samson just learned. Men were hiding in that room to seize him. Delilah led them there. He knows beyond any doubt that the woman he loves is trying to get him killed. And what does he do? He stays. He comes back. So she tries again. "You made a fool of me," she pouts. "You lied. Tell me the truth." And he lies again. "New ropes, never used," he says. She binds him with new ropes. "The Philistines are hiding again," she cries out again, and he snaps the ropes off his arms like string. Attempt 2, nothing. A third time. And this one is eerie, because he lets her get so close to the truth. "Weave the 7 locks of my hair into your loom," he tells her, "and fasten it tight." Now the hair is in the conversation. She weaves his braids into the fabric on her loom, pins it down, calls out the alarm, and he wakes and rips the whole loom out of the ground, hair and pin and fabric together. Attempt 3, gone. But he has said the word out loud now. Hair. He's circling the truth like a moth around a flame, and everyone in the room can feel it. And this is the part that still doesn't make sense, on any human level. 3 times, Delilah has openly tried to have him captured and killed. 3 times, he has watched the trap close and felt it fail. Any person alive would run. Samson doesn't run, because Delilah has found the one weapon that works on him, and it isn't a blade. It's persistence wrapped in affection. She goes at him every single day. "How can you say you love me," she says, "when you won't confide in me? You've mocked me 3 times now, day after day after day." And the text uses a devastating phrase for what this does to him. It says she pressed him with her words daily and urged him until his soul was vexed to death. Vexed to death, she nags him to the edge of despair, wears down his will like water wearing down stone, until finally, worn out, Samson does the one thing he was never ever supposed to do. He tells her everything in his heart. "No razor," he says, "has ever touched my head, because I have been a Nazirite to God from my mother's womb. If my head is shaved, my strength will leave me, and I will become weak like any other man." There it is. The last vow, the last visible thread connecting him to the God who gave him everything. And he hands it willingly to the woman being paid a fortune to destroy him. And Delilah knows this time that he's told her the truth. The text says so. She could hear it. So she sends word to the Philistine lords one final time. "Come up," she tells them. "He has told me everything." They come, bringing the silver in their hands. And she lulls Samson to sleep on her knees. She calls a man in, and while Samson sleeps against her, that man shaves off the 7 locks of his hair. And the text says she began to afflict him, to torment him, and his strength left him. The last vow is broken. The flag is gone. And now comes the single most important, most heartbreaking sentence in the entire story. When you hear it, everything I told you at the very beginning locks into place. Delilah cries out one more time, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." And he wakes from his sleep and says to himself, "I will go out as I always have and shake myself free." And then the text says this, "But he did not know that the Lord had departed from him." Read that again slowly because it is the key to this entire video. It does not say his hair had departed from him. It does not say his strength had departed from him. It says the Lord had departed from him. That is the real loss. That is what actually left the room. The strength was never in the hair. The strength was in the presence of God, the spirit that rushed on him at the lion and the ropes and the jawbone. The hair was only the sign of the promise that kept that presence near. And when the last of the promise fell to the floor of Delilah's room, the presence lifted. And the most terrifying detail of all is those 7 words, he did not know. Samson had grown so used to the power, so casual with the gift, that he assumed it would always be there for him, and he could not even feel the moment God let him go. He shakes himself the way he has 100 times before, and nothing happens. For the first time in his life, Samson is just a man, and the men who were waiting are on him in an instant. What they do to him is precise and cruel and loaded with meaning. They seize the man named for the sun, the man of light, and they gouge out his eyes. They blind him. The sun goes dark. Then they drag him down to Gaza, the very city whose gates he once tore off their hinges, and they bind him, not with ropes this time. Ropes never held him, but with heavy shackles of bronze. And they put him to work in the prison, turning a millstone, grinding grain around and around in a circle, in the dark, doing the labor of an ox or a slave. That's rock bottom. The chosen one, the deliverer, the strongest man who ever lived, reduced to a blind animal walking in circles for the entertainment and profit of his enemies. The people he was born to deliver are still enslaved, and now so is he. If the story ended here, it would be one of the bleakest in the whole Bible, a gift wasted, a calling thrown away for the touch of the wrong women, a son put out. But the story does not end here, because the narrator, having shown us the lowest possible point, drops in one more sentence. Quiet, almost tossed away, and it changes everything. However, the text says the hair of his head began to grow again after it was shaved. That's it. That's the whole line. And on the surface, it's just biology. Hair grows back. But in a story where the hair is the sign of the vow, and the vow is the sign of belonging to God, that one sentence is the first flicker of light in a very dark room. The sign is coming back, and with it quietly, so is something else. Sometime later, the Philistine rulers throw an enormous festival, a celebration and a religious one. They gather to offer a great sacrifice to their god, Dagon, and to party in his honor. And the reason for the celebration is Samson, our God, they chant, has delivered Samson, our enemy, into our hands. To them, this isn't just a military win, it's proof that their God beat Israel's God. The blind man grinding in the prison is their trophy, their evidence, their punchline. And that framing is the whole hidden point of what's about to happen, so hold on to it. To the Philistines, this was never only about capturing a dangerous man. It was theology. Dagon was their chief god, the god of grain and harvest, and in their minds, the God of Israel had lost. Their God had handed Israel's champion over in chains, blind and grinding their wheat. The festival is a victory lap, and not just over Samson, over his God, which means the roof that is about to come down is not going to land only on 3,000 people. It's going to land on that idea, on a temple built to the God they were certain had won. Samson can't see any of it, but his final act is about to become a direct answer to their chant. The temple is packed. Down in the main hall, the lords and the crowd. And up on the flat roof, the text says, about 3,000 more men and women looking down into the open hall below, all of them there to watch the show. And in their good mood, drunk on wine and victory, they call for the entertainment. Bring out Samson, they shout. Bring him out to make sport for us. Let the strong man dance for us now. So they bring him up from the prison, and they stand him in the middle of the temple, between the two central pillars that hold the whole structure up, so everyone can see him and laugh. The man who tore a lion apart, led around by the hand like a toy. And here's a detail that turns this scene from a nice story into something you can almost put your hand on. For a long time, skeptics said the whole thing made no architectural sense. A building held up by two pillars, standing close enough that one man could reach both at once. That's not how you build a roof. But then archaeologists went digging along that same coast and uncovered actual Philistine temples, including one at a site called Tel Qasil, near what is now Tel Aviv. And what were the roofs of those temples resting on? Two central pillars, set on stone bases, standing close together, right in the middle of the hall. Close enough that a large man standing between them could brace one hand on each. The exact design the Bible describes, the one critics called impossible, is sitting there in the ground, right where the story says it should be. The building Samson is about to pull down was a real kind of building, and the text knew how it was made. And Samson, blind, quietly says something to the young boy leading him. "Let me feel the pillars that hold up this temple," he says, "so I can lean against them." A small request. An old blind man wanting something to rest on. Nobody thinks anything of it. And now, for the second time in the entire story, Samson prays. The first time, remember, he was thirsty and he prayed for himself. This time is different. This time, standing blind in the temple of the god who supposedly beat his god, with 3,000 enemies laughing above him, Samson reaches out to the Lord one last time. And it is the most naked prayer in the whole book. "O Lord God," he says, "remember me. Please strengthen me just this once, O God, so that I may be avenged on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. Remember me, just this once." Now be honest about what this prayer is. It is not a polished, selfless prayer. He wants revenge for his eyes. It's raw, it's personal, it's even a little vengeful. This is not a man who has become a saint. This is a broken man, at the end of everything, reaching for the God he spent his whole life taking for granted, and simply asking to be remembered. And here is the mercy at the heart of this whole grim story. God answers. He answers a flawed, selfish, half-vengeful prayer from a man who wasted almost everything he was given. Because the strength was never about whether Samson deserved it. It was always a gift. And in his weakest, most broken, most sightless moment, the gift comes back one final time. Samson braces his right hand on one central pillar, his left hand on the other. "Let me die," he says, "with the Philistines." And he pushes. He leans into those pillars with everything left in him, all of it, one last surge of that borrowed holy strength. And the temple comes down. The pillars buckle. The roof caves, and the entire structure collapses inward, onto the rulers, onto the crowd, onto the 3,000 on the roof, and onto Samson himself. In a single moment, it's over. And then the text gives you the line that reframes his entire life. It says, "So the dead that he killed at his death were more than those he had killed during his life." Read that slowly. In one final act, blind and broken and about to die, Samson accomplished more than in all his years of raw, showy, undefeated strength. His greatest victory did not come when he was at his peak, tearing lions and carrying gates. It came at the very bottom, in the dark, in weakness, in surrender, when he finally stopped performing and simply asked God to use him one last time. His family comes for his body. His brothers and his father's household travel down, dig him out of the rubble, carry him all the way back home, and bury him between Zorah and Eshtaol, in the tomb of his father Manoah, right back where he started, back in the hills where a childless woman once stood in a field and met a stranger with a face like fire. The circle closes, and the text adds one last quiet fact, almost as an epitaph. He had judged Israel 20 years. That's the marker on the grave. Not the lion, not the jawbone, not Delilah. but 20 years standing between his people and the empire. A man who got almost everything wrong, and somehow in the end got the one thing right. So that's the story, the whole arc, from a promise before birth to a prayer in the rubble. But it leaves us holding a question that's bigger than Samson. Because centuries after all of this, another writer picks up his name and puts it somewhere that should be impossible. Right in the middle of the Bible's own Hall of Heroes. Centuries after Samson was buried in those hills, a writer in the New Testament sits down to make a list, a roll call of the greatest heroes of faith in the entire Hebrew story. And he fills it with the names you would expect. Abraham, who left everything on a promise. Moses, who faced down a pharaoh. David, the shepherd who became king. Gideon, Barak. And then, right there in the same breath, he adds one more name, Samson. Stop and feel how strange that is. This is the man who chased Philistine women against his parents' pleading, who killed 30 strangers to pay off a bet he lost, who spent a night with a prostitute in Gaza, who handed the secret of his life to a woman he knew was being paid to destroy him. By any moral scorecard you can build, Samson fails, and he fails over and over, and yet the Bible's own hall of faith saves him a place, right between Abraham and Moses. How? Here's the answer the whole story has been quietly building toward, and it reframes everything you just watched. Faith, in Samson's case, was never about being good. It was about who he reached for when he had nothing left. At his strongest, Samson trusted his own two arms. He performed, he showed off. He treated the Spirit of God like a personal party trick, and it took losing all of it, his freedom, his eyes, his dignity, the last lock of his hair, to bring him to the single most honest moment of his life. Blind, in chains, standing in the temple of an enemy god, he finally stopped relying on himself and simply said, "Remember me." That is the faith the writer is pointing at, not a lifetime of virtue, one desperate turn back toward God at the very bottom of the pit. And in the strange arithmetic of this book, that counts. And once you see that, a shape rises out of Samson's whole life that is almost impossible to unsee. A child whose birth is announced by an angel to a woman who could not have children. A deliverer set apart to God from the womb. A man filled with the Spirit, betrayed for silver and handed over to his enemies. A rescuer who is mocked and stripped and bound, and whose greatest victory comes not through his strength, but through his death, arms stretched out against 2 pillars of wood, giving his own life to break the power holding his people. If some of those beats sound familiar, you are not imagining it. For centuries, readers have looked at Samson and seen a rough, cracked, violent sketch of a greater deliverer still to come. Not a clean portrait, a broken one, but a sketch pointing forward all the same, toward a rescuer who would also be set apart from birth, also betrayed for silver, and also win his greatest victory by dying with his arms spread wide. That's the mystery hiding underneath all the muscles and the mayhem. Samson was never meant to be the hero of his own story. He was meant to point past himself to a rescue he could only ever begin. He shall begin to deliver Israel. Begin. The finish line was always somewhere over the horizon, waiting in someone else's hands. Which brings us all the way back around to where we started. We started this video with the version everyone knows. The strong man whose power lived in his hair, undone by a haircut. A cartoon of muscles and long locks and one bad decision. And when we read the actual story, slowly, from the field in Zorah to the temple in Gaza, that version fell apart. We found a strength that never came from his hair, but from the Spirit of the Lord rushing on him again and again, tzalach, at every impossible feat. We found a man who broke his sacred vows one by one, the dead lion, the drinking feast, and kept his power the whole time, because the power was never a machine you switched off. It was a gift tied to a relationship. We found a child named for the sun who ended in darkness, a deliverer sent only to begin a rescue he would never finish, and a broken man whose greatest victory came not at his strongest, but at his weakest, blind and shackled, when he finally stopped and prayed. The secret Samson never understood until the very end is the one the picture books get exactly backward. His strength, was never his. It was only ever on loan. And the tragedy of his life wasn't the haircut. It was that he treated a holy gift like it was his own possession, until the day he reached for it, and for the first time, it wasn't there. And he couldn't even feel that God had gone. And that's how a man like Samson still ends up in the Hall of Faith, remembered next to Abraham and Moses. Not because he was good, he wasn't, but because at the very end, blind and broken, he finally reached for God instead of himself. If a man who wasted that much can still be counted as faithful, it says something staggering about how this book measures a life. Not by how strong you stood at your peak, but by who you reached for at your lowest. That's the whole reason this channel exists. To open the book back up and read what's actually on the page, even when the truth turns out to be stranger or sadder or more merciful than the version we were handed. If this changed how you see even one story, subscribe, because next we're staying right here in the age of the judges and pulling apart another figure everyone thinks they understand. A woman who led an army when no man would, and won a war the men were too afraid to fight. And the video on screen right now unpacks another mystery hiding in these same pages. Go ahead and click it. I think you'll want to know how this one ends too.